All right, so here we are in Yerushalayim Ira Kodesh, and we are doing a review of Siman Shin Yud Gimel and Shin Yud Daled, 313 and 314 in Hilchos Shabbos, the laws of Binyan and Stirah, the Keilim, building and destroying Keilim. So I'm going to try to cover both what is discussed in the Shulchan Aruch Rav, as well as what is discussed in the various Acharonim, the Yalkut Yosef, and various Acharonim brought in the Dirshu and in the Piskei Teshuvos. So, although in general I'm going to go in the order of Shin Yud Gimel and Shin Yud Daled, I'm just going to give a little brief hakdama, a brief intro before we go in order. And that is that there is a very big difference between building something connected to the ground and something not connected to the ground. Something connected to the ground. First of all, we learned the whole concept of Binyan from what they did in the Mishkan, that they built the Mishkan. That was, of course, considered connected to the ground, even though it wasn't physically connected, but it was so heavy that it was practically considered connected. So the way to transgress on building when it comes to something connected to the ground has a very broader definition than when it comes to Keilim. For example, it says in Shin Yud Daled that if you knock a nail into the wall and it's going to be available for you to hang something on it, that's already boina. If you make an exit hole out of your yard to allow water to escape, that's already considered boina. Even small changes to the ground itself or to a ground that's used for living as opposed to a field that's used for planting, or to the house or whatever, the ground of the house, even small changes are significant in terms of binyan and karka. When it comes to Keilim, however, so there's a rule that says Ein Binyan b'Keilim and Ein Stirah b'Keilim. There is no prohibition of Binyan, of building when it comes to Keilim, nor of Stirah, which is demolishing. Now, the truth is that there are two ways of understanding this halacha, and that plays a big part in the discussion of this or these simanim, really. So that is that some say, when we say Ein Binyan b'Keilim and Ein Stirah b'Keilim, we're talking about only a keli that is a binyan garua, an inferior type of building. Like, for example, we're going to see later a barrel that is made of earthenware, broken, and the pieces stuck back together with some kind of tar. Whereas if it would be a real keli, like a regular barrel, then it would be an isser of binyan to build it and an isser of stirah to destroy it. That is one way in the Rishonim. And then that's Tosfos basically. And then there's another way in the Rishonim, which is Rashi, another Rishonim, that hold no, that there is no melacha d'oraisa of binyan by Keilim at all. Not for building and not of stirah for demolishing. The only thing that there can be is makah b'patish. Makah b'patish is when you complete a keli, like, for example, literally makah b'patish is the final hammer blow if you're hammering out a keli. But the same is true of anything that you do that completes the keli. That's all considered makah b'patish. So practically speaking, if you make a keli, whether you make it from scratch or you improve it in a significant way, that is going to be an isser d'oraisa. Whether it's binyan or makah b'patish is a machlokes, but that's like just a secondary point. Point is that it's forbidden and it's a Torah violation. The nafkamina between the two opinions is when it comes to destroying, because if there's an isser of binyan, there's an isser of stirah. If it's prohibited because of building, then it's also prohibited to destroy it, demolish it. That's the opposite of binyan. There is not, however, the opposite of makah b'patish. you can't be chayav for undoing the final hammer blow, right? Some halachas have their opposite, and some halachas do not have their opposite. The opposite of lighting the fire is extinguishing the fire. Those are both malachas. To carry in, carry out. I mean, they're all included in the same av, but they're both malachas. To sew and to tear, and so on and so forth. But there are many malachas that do not have the opposite of them. It's forbidden to kill. It's not forbidden to give life. It's forbidden to cook. It's not forbidden to make something inedible, and so on and so forth. So the point is, there is no opposite of Makah b'Pantish. So that is when we're going to have a nafka mina between these opinions. Okay, with no further ado, I'm going to go through these simanim and share with you both what is mentioned in the Alter Rebbe and the Mishnah Berurah, as well as the later Achronim. I'm going to try to just put them all together as we go, but if I do forget to mention anything, I'll try to go over it afterwards using the notes that I sent out to you all. Okay, so first of all, when we talk about Binyan Keilim, if you were to put a door that has hinges, top and bottom, into a keli is defined as something not connected to the ground and not very heavy. This is important. If it's very heavy, that is to say that if it's 1 by 1 by 3 amas, and therefore it could get heavy if you would fill it up, even if it happens not to be full right now, but it's considered something attached to the ground, and the definition of building is much more strict, like we said before. But if it's not like that, so it's considered a keli, so then in order to be chayiv, it would have to be a very professional type of building. When something is done in a professional and tight way, that is when it would be an issur d'oraisa. So if you would take a door that had completely come out and put it in back with the hinges, top and bottom, that would be an issur d'oraisa, because to put doors with hinges back into their place, that is something that takes strength, and it's in there very tight, and that would be an issur d'oraisa. Now, if it came out of its place somewhat, but not completely, so if the bottom hinge came out, you could stick it back in, because it's not difficult, because the weight of the door itself holds it in place. If the top one came out, you cannot put it back in. Now, there were some doors that only had one hinge. Obviously, with the 2 hinge doors, you could open and close it, keeping the door in place. The 2 hinges, the 1 hinge door just had one like little thing sticking out on the side, and you would fit that 1 hinge into the keli, right, into the frame of that door in the keli that you would bring it into, and it would just kind of hold it in place. That cannot be done tight. It has to be, used for in and out. But if you are allowed to put that door back, you might put a door with 2 hinges back, and therefore the sages forbade that unless it's for Yontif. They permitted it for the purpose of Simchas Yontif. It seems like this was not an uncommon type of door for storekeepers to have, and therefore they wanted to allow it so that storekeepers could make their stuff accessible. Now, I do want to mention that the Piskei Teshuvah says that nowadays our doors are not really like this. We don't have doors that you can put in tightly. I'm talking about doors of Keilim. Doors of Karka, obviously you cannot put any door back on its hinge. On Shabbos, that would be a Torah level violation. When it comes to the hinges of Keilim, he says it's not something you could put in very tight. If you put it in very tight, it ruins it, because it has to be somewhat loose to be able to move around. So it seems like, according to him, it would not be forbidden. Now, of course, every keli has to be judged separately if it is tight, or if it does require uman, a professional. That's another way of telling if it's considered d'oraisa. If it needs a professional, then it certainly should not be done. But if it's something that is loose and is simple to do, so it seems from the Piskei Teshuvah that it is allowed nowadays. Now, to remove the doors, if they are not tight, it is permissible. If they are tight, it's forbidden. If they're tight, it's forbidden because of Stirah, following the main opinion that says yesh Stirah b'Keilim if it is a complete binyan. If it's loose, you're allowed to take it out. We don't make a decree because there's no problem with taking out something loose. There's no gzeira that if you take something out loose, you take out something tight. By Binyan, it's a gzeira. If you put this in loose, you may put this very thing in tight. But we're not going to say that if you take this thing in loose, you're going to take this out tight. This thing's already going to be out. Okay. And like we said, when it comes to things connected to the ground, we are much more strict. So when it comes to doors, windows of the house, or of even a chicken coop that's connected to the ground, one has to be very strict. And therefore, he says what sometimes people do is that they have a goy remove window panes when there's too much of a crowd and it's too hot to let the air in. That is not allowed, because that is actually a Torah violation, and you're not allowed to have a goy do a Torah violation for you, even in the case of need. That being said, some say it's only rabbinic violation because the window panes, when you put them back, they're not better than they were before. Some say that in order to be chayev, it has to be not just a soiso manas livnois. In general, to be chayev for Stirah, for demolishing, it has to be with the condition that you're planning to put it back together. If not, then you're potter. But some say that it has to be with the intent to put it back better than before. According to that opinion, it's not forbidden here by Torah law, only by rabbinic law. Therefore, you would be allowed to have goyim do it. So you don't have to stop people that have goyim do it because it is a subject of machlokes. However, certainly the Jews themselves may not do it. That is a severe violation. Now, this whole thing about a binyan garua and a Stirah garua is only spoken about an existing keli. Whereas if you make a keli from scratch, even if it's not a very strong keli, that is a problem. So it would seem like something like a paper airplane, even though I know kids do it and maybe it's fun, but it seems to be usher on Shabbos. Because when you're making something in the first place, even if it's not a very strong thing, we are stricter. Certainly if you do it, if you make something that is firm, like if you attach the handle of a spade or an axe or anything like that to the metal, that is a Torah violation. Now the same thing applies to something that is made in the first place with the intention that it should be taken apart and put back together. For example, when you have a bed that people who travel take with them, they take it apart when they travel and put it back together when they arrive. So that is something that, if it is tight when it's put together, is a Torah violation. Now, it seems that there are three levels when it comes to the definition of tightness here. There is very tight, there is firm, and there is loose. Something that is done loosely and is usually done loosely is fine to do. Something that is usually done tight, Torah violation, you cannot even do loosely, because you may forget and do it tight. Then there are items that are done firm but not tight, and those are things that there's a machlokes about. Some say you're allowed to do it because you're not going to do it tight, because it's not normally done tight, it's just done firm. Firm is something between loose and tight. If it is, on the other hand, others forbid it because it is somewhat tight and you may do it fully tight, and therefore they forbid it. And therefore, there is a machlokes about these types of cups that they used to put together, and the leg would be put together with the cup itself. There's a machlokes if you can do that, and that depends on these two opinions. Chazon Ish actually allows that one should put together something loosely, even if it is normally done tight. Also, the Achronim point out that when it comes to the definition of what is usually done loose and usually done tight, we go by the individual person, whether he usually does this item loose or tight, not by the majority of the world, because the point is to see what he is likely to do. Now, anything that you're not allowed to put together because it's too tight, you're not allowed to take apart either if it's too tight. Whereas if something you're not allowed to put together just because it's firm and we're afraid that you may do it tight, well, if it's not tight, you're allowed to take it apart. Like we said, we don't make a decree in that case. Okay, a beam. Let's say you're not yours, but hopefully not yours, but somebody's ceiling is starting to fall. So the cross beams and the ceiling are starting to fall. So you want to take a bench and put it under that beam so that it should not continue to fall. You can't push it back up because that would be considered binyan. You cannot stick the bench in tight because that's called bitul kli mehechane. That's called ruining a keli. Nor, the Alter Rebbe holds, nor can you put in something that is like a board as opposed to a bench, because you may decide to leave it there, and that's called moisef al binyan. It looks like you're adding to the building. It has to be like a bench or something like that that you're definitely going to remove from there. A few points that the Achronim discuss here. First of all, the Mishnah Berurah brings opinions that say you're allowed to put in a board as well, because it's not likely that you're going to leave it there. Second of all, in terms of the definition of bittul kli mehechonai, so the Dirsha brings down that Reb Shlomo Zalman says you are allowed to use napkins, tissues, and other throwaway items, even though once you use them, they become kind of disgusting. You're not going to use them again. That's not called bittul kli mehechonai because you're destroying the whole keli. You're not left with something that is a batal keli. There's something nothing left that's considered destroyed. Also because it was specifically made with that in mind, so it's not considered like you're doing any particular bittul kli mehechonai. So it is also noteworthy, the Alter Rebbe doesn't bring this here, but the Mechaber does. The Alter Rebbe brings it back in Shin Ches in 308, that if you have a bench that the legs of the bench broke before Shabbos, or even on Shabbos, you're not allowed to use that bench, even propping it up on something, because you may forget and fix the bench. However, there are a few caveats here. If you cannot fix the bench, for example, the wood actually broke instead of just coming out, instead of the legs just coming out, in which case you could put it back in, the legs actually broke. So now to fix it, you need a carpenter really to make new legs. Well, that you're not going to do because you're not a carpenter. Another thing is if you have a bench that broke, but you used it once before Shabbos, that already indicates that you're willing to use it without fixing it, so then you're allowed to continue using it on Shabbos. Now, if you're not allowed to use it, so many Achronim hold that it becomes muktzah because it has no use whatsoever. Some Achronim are lenient. So the point is that the same thing would apply to a pair of glasses that break. If it's a type of thing that a regular person can fix and you haven't used it yet, it would seem that you're not allowed to use it and should become muktzah. In other words, if you have the arm that broke and you have the screw and you have the screwdriver and all you have to do is put it back together and you didn't do that, you cannot use it without doing it. Obviously, putting it back together is considered boina because it's tight, or makim patish, whatever. And to use it without doing that, we're afraid you might forget and do it. And therefore, it should even be a muktzah. So it would seem, unless you use it at least once before Shabbos. All right. We also spoke about at the end of Shin Yud Gimel, if your courtyard became ruined from rain or whatever, you're allowed to take straw and put it down there. The reason that you can only take straw and you cannot take regular earth is because you might leave the earth there. And then that could be a severe violation if you put it in such a way that it makes the ground smooth and flat, if it fills the holes and whatever. Whereas when it comes to the straw, you're presumably going to take it away after it dries to feed to your animals or to use for cement as they used to do. Now, this is all because you are putting it there because the courtyard got ruined. If it's not ruined from rain, it's just a little bit of dirt there or phlegm or something that somebody spit, then it says you are allowed to use non-muktzah dirt that you set aside for Shabbos for this sort of thing to simply cover that junk. In terms of how you carry the straw, because it is a somewhat weekday kind of activity, you should not do it using a basket or a box. You should turn the box upside down and put the straw on the top and kind of throw it off from that basket. So it's like a shinoi kalachayad. Okay, let me go over the notes that I sent out and read what I wrote on Siman Shin Yud Gimel and see if there's anything that I missed out. Okay, I did mention that 40 saw. There's different opinions in the Achronim in terms of how many gallons that is for the purpose of making a mikveh, 180, 198, or 264. Okay. Lego, Yalkut Yosef says it's permissible to have children play with Lego. Now, the reason that it's permissible is because, first of all, it does not seem to be tight. It seems to be firm, but not tight. Now, that would still not allow it because it could be it's forbidden midrabanan. But nevertheless, the reason for leniency is because here it is a toy and it's made to put together and take apart. And therefore, that might be considered the way you use it as opposed to a keli that you make and then use for something else. As such, because there's room for leniency, you can allow children under bar bas mitzvah to do it. It would seem, however, that if it's a type of Lego that kids plan to leave for a long time, they want to make a project, and they want to leave it there because they're so excited about it, that should not be done on Shabbos. Okay, now, talking about glasses, if the arm came off, you can't use a screw. Shlomo Zalman says you also cannot use like a paper clip or something because you may forget and use the screw. Similarly, Ibn Nissim Karelet says you cannot put back the lens if it comes out because you may do it tight. The Yalkut Yosef says that you can put back the lens because it's not tight. Even though it's firm, it's not tight, following the Yalkut Yosef's opinion that we paskin like the opinion that says that firm and not tight is okay. I guess Ibn Nissim is paskining like the other opinion that says if it's firm, it should not be done. But the Yalkut Yosef's point is that you can't do it tighter than it's supposed to be. However tight it is what it is, and you can't really do that tighter than that. In terms of winding a watch, the Yalkut Yosef says you are allowed to wind a watch as long as the watch is still working. So he doesn't consider that a tikkun kli because there's nothing visible that changes. If it stops working, you should not do it. Shmir Shabbos Kol Chasi is strict on this, even if it's still working. However, he does say that on the second day of Yom Tov, you can be lenient. Yalkut Yosef also says that you're allowed to wear a watch that is self-winding as long as the watch hasn't stopped. And he says that even those achonim that forbid winding a watch would permit it here because it's not being done intentionally. Yalkut Yosef goes on to say that you're allowed to blow up a pillow that you're going to use to sleep on. Since it's already a keli before you blew it up, it's not considered a significant change. He does bring other achonim that disagree. Now, going back to things that are done tight, I forgot to mention that the Mishnah Berurah and the Alter Rebbe both say that bottle caps, even though they're screwed tightly shut, are allowed because it's made to open and close all the time, and therefore it's not considered like Binyan or Stirah. Now, the reason why it's allowed, Shlomo Zalman explains that because people take it apart and put it back, so therefore even when it's apart, it is considered to be a keli. And it's just different ways that the keli looks. Chazon Ish says that because when it's closed, it's not an accessible, usable keli, so that makes it clear that you're in the middle of doing something with it as opposed to having nullified it. So the Maisa, according to Shlomo Zalman, he says you are allowed to open the top of a salt shaker and put salt in it or whatever, because the fact is that that's the way you use it. According to Chazon Ish, it's not so clear because you could use it without a top to the salt shaker. According to Shlomo Zalman, you are allowed. Now, even though you don't do it all the time, but nevertheless, you do it once in a while. And you also sometimes open it to clean the holes that Piskei Teshuvos adds if they get clogged up. As far as the thermometer, Shlomo Zalman, the Or L'Tzion, and Rav Elyashiv all allowed to shake down the mercury of a thermometer. I don't know if they make those thermometers nowadays, but nevertheless, because that is not a significant change in their opinion, Shevet HaLevi forbids it. As far as a stender that has different heights, Shlomo Zalman says you're allowed to adjust the height because he says that it's not like it's two different parts. So it's all the same stender. It never really changes. So therefore he allows it, even if it's not done all the time. If it's done all the time, it seems clear that it's mutter. But even if it's not done all the time, because it's simply the same stender, and you're just loosening the screw that remains attached to it the whole time, making it higher or lower and putting it back, they say it's allowed. And if he was strict on this, it would seem that he was only strict in a case where it's not changed back and forth all the time. Now, based on Shlomo Zalman's ruling, you could also open and close a baby carriage, a high chair, folding table, bed, chair, all these things, even if they're tight, but if they are made to open and close, make bigger and smaller, and that is simply the way you use it, and you don't have to take it apart, but it remains connected to all its parts, that would be mutter. The Piskei Teshuvos adds, however, that if it's a new item that you just got from the factory, even though it may be simple, but if you actually have to put it together for the first time, even if the parts are all attached, but you must actually put it together the first time, it may be forbidden, as the first time may be more strict than the subsequent times. He says it's a machlekes, it's not so clear, but it is something to know about. Okay, making seltzer using soda stream. The Yalkut Yosef says it is allowed, and it's not considered a significant change. It's not moiled because those bubbles are not significant. There's no Maka B'Patish Ba'Echlim, and he does allow it. I believe that the Shmir Shabbos says the same thing. The Yalkut Yosef also allows the use and the adjustment of a telescope on Shabbos, obviously one that does not use electricity. The same would apply to binoculars. Now, going back to the sagging roof, Shlomo Zalman says that it's only allowed because what you're putting there to stop it from deteriorating further is outside of the item itself. He says if you would put something on the item itself to stop it from deteriorating more, it would be forbidden. For example, he says if a woman has a run in her stockings, apparently you can stop it from running further by putting some liquid soap on it. And Rav Shlomo Zalman says that's not allowed because you're putting it on the stocking itself, so that's like you are fixing it. The Piskei Teshuvos says that if a bulletin board is attached to the wall, it would not be allowed to attach any papers to it or move papers. Anything attached to the ground is very strict, like we said before. If it's not attached to the ground, there may be room to allow it because it's like a Binyan Gerua and not very significant. Okay, that's pretty much it for Siman Shin Yud Gimel. We are going to move on to Siman Shin Yud Daled. Once again, like I said, I am going to go through the Shulchan Aruch more or less, and then tell you the Achronim as I do it, and then I'll look at the notes that you should have, and I will try to review anything that I did not mention. Okay, so I already mentioned earlier that the barrel, you are allowed to break. You have a barrel that has figs in it, and any other dried fruit, whatever it is, and the barrel is made of broken shards of pottery that are stuck together with tar, so you're allowed to break it and take out the stuff that's inside. That's not considered, first of all, since you're breaking it, you're not making a Pesach, no, you're not making a nice opening. If you make a nice opening, even though it's a Binyan Gerua, it would be Maka B'Patish, but you're not making a nice opening, and there's no decree that you're going to make a nice opening because it is a Binyan Gerua. It's a very simple type of barrel. Okay, let's talk a little bit about a peg in the wall. We mentioned before, if you put a peg in the wall, it is a Torah violation because you are fixing the house. The Alter Rebbe says even if you just made a hole to put the peg in later, it's still considered boina. It's interesting the Mishnah Berurah considers it makabeh patish, not boina. I am not sure why. Also, we said if you make a hole to let the water out of the courtyard, that's also boina. When it comes to something that is not connected to the ground, you're not chayiv unless either it's a Pesach Noah, a nice opening, or if it's asel lahachlas l'hotzit, it's used for the, for things to go in and out. So when you have a lul shel tanagoyim, you have a chicken coop. You want the smell to go out and you want the new air to come in. That would be a isur makabeh patish. Now let's say you're making a hole, but it's only going to serve a function of taking stuff out, or for that matter, putting things in. So that's only exer the chachamim that says you're not allowed to do it. So let's say you want to make a hole in a barrel to allow the wine to come out. So that's forbidden with Rabbanan because you may make a hole also for putting wine back in. The fact that air comes in also, Shlomo Zalman says that's not considered significant here because that's not your intention. By the chicken coop, you want the air to come in. Here, the air is just coming in to allow you to let the wine out. That's not considered coming in. Chazon Ish disagrees, it seems. Nevertheless, the point is that even this hole, even if you want to just add to the hole, it's forbidden. However, in a case where there's a knife stuck into the barrel, and by taking the knife out, you might add to the hole. If it's a question that you might add, it's for sure allowed. It's called davashim miskam, an unintended consequence. If it's for sure going to open the hole because you didn't take it out yet ever during the week, so then it's a machlokes if you're allowed to or not. Those that say you're allowed say, well, it's only a rabbinic violation, and right because it's only made to go out, and even so, it's not doing the whole violation; it's only adding to it. And it's not your intention, right? And you're doing it in a kalachar yad way. You're doing it in an unusual way. And the Alter Rebbe says the main halacha is like that opinion. Nevertheless, it's good to be strict like the other opinion that says that even so, you shouldn't do it if it's a psik reisha. If it's a sure thing, you should not remove that knife. Now, this is all if the knife is stuck into the barrel. If it's stuck into the wall, so when you remove it, you are actually enlarging that hole. And that hole could be an Issa D'Oraisa. Now, of course, you're not doing it for the purpose of hanging a picture there. But if you would want to, you could. And that would be an Issa D'Oraisa. So therefore, you should not remove that. Now, even though this is the minhag, the Magen Avraham questions whether it is actually a halachic necessity. Because the fact is you're not intending to use that hole for anything. So really, it's a malacha she'en tzarich lagufa. You don't need it. And in fact, making holes in the wall is actually an act of kilkul. It's actually destroying, and it's not intended, and it's kalachar yad. So really, it should be allowed. The Magen Avraham says, nevertheless, the custom is to be strict and not to do it. Now, all of this is only in either a keli or in the wall. If it's, however, in a bench where there is nothing on the other side that needs to come out, it's just stam a hole in a bench. There, you could take out the knife even for the first time because you're mamash not doing anything. There's no malacha, there's no hole. I mean, there's a hole, but it's not taking in or out or anything, and therefore there's no problem to take it out. Okay, let me see if there's anything that the Achronim add to this. I mean, this is not very practical. I don't know anybody who owns even one wine barrel. And certainly I don't know anybody who sticks knives into the wine barrels. So, I just will mention that if there's already a nail in the wall, Yalkut Yosef says you're allowed to hang a picture from it or remove a picture. But if the nail itself comes out, you're not allowed to put it back. Now, speaking about malachas in the karka itself, removing a blockage in a pipe is also manatayr. It says that in Siman Shin Lamed Vav. So what about a sink? Are you allowed to unclog a sink? Well, Yasha says no. Shlomo Zalman says yes. He says it's like cleaning a bottle because he considers that not a permanent blockage. Reb Moshe differentiates. He says if it's a common occurrence, so then it's considered like something not permanent and you can remove it. In addition, if it's not completely clogged, so that's not a significant change, you're also allowed to unclog it. But if it's completely clogged and it's not a common occurrence, you cannot do it except through a goy in a case of great need. All of this would seem to apply to a bathroom, to a toilet as well. The Yalkut Yosef says you cannot do it with a plunger or any instrument, but you can pour hot water into it. I guess that's, if it's just something you could wash away with hot water, it's obviously not stuck that tight that it should really be considered a real permanent breakage of that pipe, so to speak. Now, speaking of Tikkun Keilim, Alter Rebbe says you're not allowed to put a new shoelace into a shoe. Even if it's an old shoe, the shoelace broke, you're not allowed to put a new shoelace in. The Yalkut Yosef allows it as long as it is a shoe that once had a shoelace in it. Okay, now there's a whole section about reopening holes in barrels. I'm going to go through it quickly because, like I said, we don't really have barrels. But because it's Shulchan Aruch, we're going to mention it quickly. So if a barrel has a hole that you closed up, if the hole is in the bottom of that barrel, you cannot reopen it because it must be tight to hold the wine in. If it's in the top, you're allowed to reopen it. Some say that only applies if it is a earthenware barrel, so you can't stick it in very tight. If it's a wooden barrel, they say you cannot open it even if it's on the top. In terms of holes on the top of the barrel, so they used to have something that they used to cover the top of the barrel after you opened it with, and that was called a bung, a megufa. So you are not allowed to make a hole in the side of the barrel because, like we said before, you can't make a hole in the side of the barrel because that's like a pesach, lahotzi. Even though it's only lahotzi, it's also midrabanan, and so on. If you slice off the top of the barrel, again, this is either a barrel that is made of broken pieces of clay or even a full barrel, but the top of it is only attached. It's something else that is attached to it. So you can slice that whole thing off. That's not like making an opening. That is just showing how generous you are, that you want to finish it off with all your guests there. So that's allowed. If you want to make a hole in the megufa, so on the side of the megufa you cannot, because that's considered a normal place to make a hole, because you might want to take one out of there instead of removing the whole megufa. However, making a hole on the top is not a usual place to make a hole because something might fall into it, and therefore the fact that you make it there is like a shinoi, and there's no gzeira, and it's allowed. Also bearing in mind that the megufa is not really considered fully attached to the barrel, so it's like you're making a hole almost in a hole, and again, you can't do it on the side because that's a normal thing. It might lead to making a regular hole, but on the top you are allowed. Okay, now, if you have a leaf and you want to put it into the hole in the barrel, you have a hole in the barrel of wine that you opened up based on the permissible way that we just learned. But now the wine is just going to trickle down the side of the barrel and you're not going to be able to catch it. So you want to put something into that hole. So if it's a pipe or a tube, you can put it in, even if you never put it in before Shabbos. We're not concerned that you're going to fix it or cut it to size because we're not concerned that you're going to do that. If, however, it is a leaf, you're not allowed to roll it into a little tube-like, roll and put it in. Because now that you are rolling it into a tube-like roll, you are actually doing an act of tikkun kli, as opposed to before when you were just taking an existing tube and sticking it in. And that you're not allowed to do. Now, even though we know you're allowed to use oichlin in a way that is similar to a keli, like you're allowed to use a besamim as a toothpick, but that's if the whole keli is made out of it. But if you're using it for an existing keli, then it's forbidden. Some say the reason for this is not the actual problem of rolling the leaf, but rather because if you were allowed to use the leaf, you may end up also breaking off leaves from the branch. Even if the branch is disconnected from the ground, breaking off leaves for the purpose of using for a keli is also forbidden. and therefore, according to that opinion, it would be allowed if you have plenty of leaves that are already broken off. The Alter Rebbe says, based on the Tosefta, you're allowed to rip the leather that is covering a barrel in order to get the wine out of there. It's not like you're making a keli, as long as you don't make it in a way that you are careful to make a spout or something. Now, the question is, why is it not an issur of kareya, of ripping? The Alter Rebbe explains elsewhere that whenever the item is not made of different components like threads in a garment, there is no issur of kareya. Now, there could be tikkun kli, if you do it in a way that makes a nice opening, or even a two-way opening. There could be an issur machatech, we'll learn about that in a second, to cut in a measured way. There could be even an issur of toichen, as we're going to see later, grinding. But there is no issur of kareya per se. Now, the Mishnah Berurah disagrees with this based on a Yerushalmi. It says that Shulchan defends Alter Rebbe, but the bottom line is Mishnah Berurah disagrees. According to him, why is it mutter? So the Shvis Shabbos says that this leather is like the shell of a nut, which we're going to learn about later, is not significant. Chazon Ish says because you have no use for the leather, just for the wine, so that's not considered correct. Okay, now we mentioned machatech before, so therefore it is worth mentioning that machatech means to cut in a measured way. So, for example, if you have feathers and you cut off the sharp, pointy edges so you can put the rest in a pillow, that is machatech. You're cutting in a measured way. So to cut, small pieces of firewood to be able to have kindling wood is forbidden. That's machatech. To cut anything in a way that makes a keli is forbidden as tikkun kli. To cut a large piece into small pieces, like sawdust, for example, could be an issur of toichen. However, if you cut something big into pieces that are not very small, and you're not making a keli, and you're not cutting in a measured way, like you're chopping wood, that is none of the above. Now, it's still uvdin d'chayil on Shabbos to chop wood, but it's none of the particular malachos. So if it's something that does not have an uvdin d'chayil component, it would be okay. So, for example, if you want to cut off the strings that are holding the kishka together, you have kishka, right, the intestines of the animal, you stuffed it with all kinds of yummy things, whatever, and you want to cut out that thread or that string, that is permissible. You're not making a keli, you're not cutting in a measured way, and that's it. There's also no kareya according to Alter Rebbe because you're just cutting across the string. You're not, it's one thread for sure not, but even many threads that are spun together, you're not separating them out. You're just cutting across them, so that's not a problem. Why, according to the Mishnah Berurah, is it not considered kareya? So I think in the Piskei Teshuvos he explains that because it's not shaykh to have kareya in a case that you could not possibly sew it back together. You cannot sew back a string that's cut in that way together, and therefore the Mishnah Berurah does not hold of kareya in that circumstance. If you have lebens, two lebens, like those yogurts, according to B'Shem Zalman, you're allowed to break them apart. It's not considered machatech, because even though you're cutting in a measured way, but you're not particular, just they made it that way, so it should be able to cut that way. Rabbi Yashiv says no, it is considered machatech. And the Yalkut Yosef, it says it's mutter, but that the machmir will get a bracha. When it comes to opening a soda can, Rabbi B'Shem Zalman says it's allowed. As far as machatech is concerned, as far as taking keli, we'll get to that later. And as far as making an opening, which is also tikkun keli, he said that's not your intention. It's just a convenience. Rabbi Yashiv is strict. That could be machatech. It could also be tikkun keli. We'll discuss more about that later. Now, when it comes to the covers of Keilim that are attached to those Keilim with a rope, you could either untie the Keilim or you could cut through the Keilim, through the rope, because anything connected to the ground, if it's not strong like a rope, is not a problem. But if it's attaching the covers of karka, then you're not allowed to tie. So you're allowed to untie, because the knot is not considered permanent, but you're not allowed to rip through the rope, because that is connected to the ground, and therefore that is strict. Similarly, with a lock, you are not allowed to break the lock of anything connected to the ground. That would be an issur d'oraisa. To break a lock of something not connected, like a keli, so that depends on the opinions. If you hold that there is binyan Gomor by Keilim, and there is also Stirah Gomor by Keilim. Breaking a lock would be a Torah prohibition. But if you hold like Rashi, so there is no prohibition Midoraisa at all about breaking, because there is no binyan or stirah by Keilim, and there is no opposite makbel patish, and therefore, if you need to, you can ask a goy to break a lock, and the same thing comes to taking out hinges of Keilim. And when it comes to karka, you could not do that because we said it is do'araisa. Of course, if you're not going to build it better than it was before, that's a separate machlokes. We discussed it already. If you have a key and it's not working in your lock, you're allowed to rub it to try to make it work. Akut Yosef says that. That's not considered taking kli. Piskei Tshuva, says that. Okay, let's talk about chosolos shel tamarim. I believe it's also the Tosefta that says that you are allowed to break the chosolos shel tamarim. These were woven palm frond baskets that held dates and ripening dates, and basically it's like breaking the one of the Rishonim, I think it's maybe the Agor, says that it's like breaking the shell of a nut to get to the nut that's in it. Now those words are very significant. What does it mean, the shell of the nut? So some say that it's because its purpose is to ripen fruit. It's considered like the shell. And even if the purpose is not to ripen the fruit, that Moshe adds, but nevertheless, it is normally thrown out once you're finished with it. So that's considered the shell of the nut. It's not significant. It's bottle, and it is mutter. The Alter Rebbe, however, says that it is considered like the shell of a nut in terms of the fact that it's a binyan garua. It's an unimportant binyan, which means that according to the Alter Rebbe, it sounds like he's saying that if it would be a strong binyan, then it would be forbidden, regardless of the fact that you are planning to throw it out. And that's exactly how the Tehillah Ladava paskins. Again, based on Rav Moshe's understanding, he says you should be allowed to throw away any one-time use keli, whether it is a tuna fish can, any other vegetable can, whether it's a soda can. That's not, there's no issue of tukun keli because it's not a keli. It's just like the shell of a nut. And the Achronim continue and say, Shlomo Zalman, for example, says there's no tikkun keli. So the fact that you make a nice opening in the soda can, it's not important. It's not a keli. It's nothing. It's like the shell. The Tehillah David, on the other hand, says that since it's all about the strength, if it's a strong item, so for example, a tuna fish can, even a soda can could be somewhat strong, could last for months. So it's not so simple. It could be that the rules do apply. Now, the Chazon Ish has a whole other take on it. Chazon Ish says that once a can is sealed, it's not considered a keli anymore, it's considered like a stone. And opening it up, rather than being a stira, or just Lasiyas Pesach, he considers that like you're making a keli, because you're turning it from a stone, when it's sealed, into a keli. According to him, I want to say maybe it's mutter if you do it in such a way that you damage it from being a keli, like you open both sides, or if you open it with a jagged edge, so nobody's going to use it continually. That's a chiddush, and the Chazon Ish himself doesn't say it, but in any case, the whole svara of the Chazon Ish is a chiddush to say that it's considered like not a keli just because it's sealed. In any case, the Piskei Tshuva always recommends that you open things before Shabbos, get out of any trouble. The Akut Yosef, by the way, permits it as long as it's a place that everybody throws it out, so that it's not a permanent kind of keli. The Akut Yosef, by the way, says that even though the Mechaber quotes Tosfos that says Yesh Binyan the Keilim if it's a Binyan Gomor and Stirah Gomor, he says that the Mechaber of Yisakar perhaps did not see all the Rishonim who agree with Rashi, as well as the simple reading of the Rif and the Rambam, that there is no binyan or stir b'kelim at all, and that's how he paskins in fact. So that's a very significant opinion. On the other end, the Piskei Tshuva says if somebody already opened a can or whatever in a way that you personally forbid, based on the poskim you follow, nevertheless, b'diavad, you can benefit from it because of the poskim that allow it. Interestingly, Rav Moshe says that you should not open a cardboard milk carton because it's a nice opening. Now, I'm not sure why that's important. since after all he passes himself that any throwaway item does not involve these Yisurim. I'm guessing that he may be basing what he says on his actual maskana. His actual maskana is that a Jew should not open any jars, because in fact it's hard to know when is a jar throwaway, when is it not throwaway, who throws it away. Everybody, some people, you. So he says a Ben Torah should not do it unless he is in private and there's no guy to help him and nobody's watching. Then maybe, but in general, it should not be done. So maybe he's suggesting the same with a cardboard milk carton. Now, opening a beer bottle, Chazon Ish says is mutter, even though the cap gets a bit crooked, but the fact is it's still a usable cap, and that's it. Now, when it comes to bottle caps, so there seems to be a difference between metal and plastic. We never really properly understood this in the shear, but it seems for some reason that the metal is not considered a usable keli until you break it off from the ring, and therefore actually the Zalman considers it to be makabeh patish, whereas a plastic cap he considers to be a usable item, and the ring that's there is not significant, doesn't really make a difference, and therefore he is lenient on the plastic. Now it is noteworthy that Yaakov Yosef is lenient also on metal bottle caps, because he also says there's no big difference between before and after the ring is broken, and Reb Nissim Karelitz is strict even with plastic bottle caps. So if you really want to be careful, you'll open them all before Shabbos, and b'di'evad, you can ask a goy to do it in any case, even with a metal one, because of the Yaakov Yosef's psak. Another point he says, the Piskei Teshuva says, is not to disconnect the ring. If you did open it and it didn't get disconnected completely, you should not disconnect it. Now, when we spoke about things attached to the ground being much more strict in terms of opening, closing, removing, breaking, cutting, and so on. So the Alter Rebbe says that if it's something that is constantly being attached and reattached, then it's not considered like Binyan and Stirah at all. So in the olden days, it seems like they used to have these ovens that they would close by putting a board at the front of the oven and smearing it in its place. So that was allowed. You were allowed to break it on Shabbos. I don't think you could close it on Shabbos because that smearing is a problem. But breaking it is allowed on Shabbos because that's not considered like something closed. It's like the megufa of the chavos we had before. That's expected to be open and therefore it's allowed. If you do have a hole in the barrel, again, we don't really have these barrels nowadays, but you have a hole in the barrel, you were not allowed to close it with a pebble because that was considered like fixing the barrel, but you could close it with food if you say that you're doing it for storing the food. If you're Talmid Chacham, you could do that sort of harama, that sort of trick. It's like a kalachar yad, and it's not a real melacha d'oraisa, so therefore he allows it. When it comes to wax, you cannot use wax to close up a hole, whether you put it in or even if you put it on top of the hole, because it's a gzeira that you might smear that wax. And there is a rule that smearing is a problem of mericha, one of the 49 malachas of mimareach, to smoothen. It's actually a tool of mamachik, which is to smoothen the leather, but it is nevertheless a Torah violation. Now, the same thing applies to like animal fat. Even though we know there's a klal in merucha b'ochel, I'm going to get to it later, that there is no issur of smoothing when it comes to oichel. So you're allowed to smooth your butter on your bread, but that's only when you're actually eating it. But when you're using it as a building material, not as food, like in this case, that is when we would say merucha, therefore you're not allowed to do it. When you have earplugs that are made out of wax, Shlomo Zalman says you could use them if they've already been put in once, and you're just going to put it in. Nissim Karelitz disagrees because he says you may end up actually smearing it. All right, I actually was reading mostly from the notes then, so I'm just going to look through the Alter Rebbe and see what I missed. All right, we spoke about leaves, spoke about the two opinions of why not leaves, spoke about the leather, spoke about breaking off the top of a barrel, hole in the side of the barrel, side of the megufa, top of the megufa, cutting leather. I didn't mention this. If you cut leather to a certain size, strips to a certain size, That is the Malacha al Machadach. In the Mishkan, they would cut the different leathers for the different purposes, specifically to make a covering for the oil. They cut it in a specific way. When it comes to chopping wood on Shabbos, it's also obviously, like we said, it's ud nachal. If it's muktzah wood, then it's for sure also anyway because of muktzah. Removing hinges is considered a Stirah gemor because the hinges are considered to be tight. Okay, nowadays we don't really have Talmid Chachamim concerning some halachas, but concerning this halacha of putting something, food item, and saying that you're putting it to guard it instead of close the hole is allowed because some permit that for everybody, even a non-Talmid Chacham, and therefore they say it is allowed even for a nowadays Talmid Chacham, even though for other areas in halacha we don't necessarily say that the person have the status of a Talmid Chacham. All right. It's been a pleasure. I wish you all a good day. I hope you get a chance to watch this and jot down any questions as you're watching it and make sure to save them for next week, or you could send them to me by email and we'll try to address any questions next week. Actually, Monday night next week, I'm not sure about the class because my son's flight is arriving back from camp in Montreal at 7 something. So I'm not sure how I'm going to do it in terms of the class and him, and my wife's away, so I'm kind of stuck on that one. I will have to let you know. Maybe I'll just record it on Sunday night and then we'll skip Monday and go straight to Tuesday. Okay, I'll let you know on the WhatsApp or whatever. All the best. Bye, everybody. Bye from Yerushalayim specifically.